When my wife died, the house didn't just fall quiet, it became hollow. Every room felt like it was waiting for her footsteps, her voice, her soft humming in the mornings. In those first weeks, I avoided touching her things. I couldn't bring myself to disturb the last traces of her life. But there was one object I couldn't ignore, a sealed envelope sitting on her bedside table, marked in her handwriting with 5 simple words. "Read this only when you are ready." I wasn't ready. Not then, not for a long time. I walked past that letter every day, pretending it wasn't calling to me. I knew my wife. She didn't write lightly. If she left a message behind, it wasn't sentimental fluff. It was truth. And truth hurts more than grief ever could. 3 weeks after her funeral, I finally sat down, held the envelope in both hands, and opened it. I expected a love note. I expected reassurance. Maybe a memory she wanted me to keep alive. Instead, I found a confession. Steady, clear, written with a heaviness I felt through the ink. She told me she had spent years protecting me from a betrayal I never saw coming. Someone close to me, someone I trusted, someone I let into my home, someone I defended, had taken something that couldn't be replaced. Not money alone, not reputation alone, but the foundation of trust our family stood on. I had always blamed the wrong person. I had spent years resenting an innocent man while the real deceiver sat across from me at dinners, laughed with me, offered to help me, and pretended loyalty. My wife wrote that she didn't tell me while she was alive because she knew it would destroy me. She wanted to spare me until I was strong enough to face it. But in her final days, she realized I deserved the truth more than I deserved comfort. And the name she wrote, the name of the betrayer, changed everything I believed about loyalty, family, and love. Before I continue, if stories like this interest you, please subscribe to the channel. Now, let me tell you exactly what my wife revealed. In the weeks after I read my wife's letter, the world felt strangely dimmed, as if someone had quietly lowered the brightness on my life. I woke each morning to a house that held her absence as tightly as it once held her warmth. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was a reminder, constant, unblinking, that she was no longer moving through the rooms she filled so effortlessly. Our home sat on a quiet stretch of land just outside town. A modest place, nothing extravagant, but built with intention. My wife chose every curtain, every color on the walls, every flower in the garden. She said a home should feel like a gentle embrace. For 40 years, it did. I met her when I was 22. She was 20. Soft-spoken, sharp-minded, and impossibly patient. We built a life step by step. Marriage, a small business, a child, countless shared disappointments and victories. Even when times were tight, even when we faced losses that carved pieces out of us, we held on to each other. Loyalty wasn't a word between us, it was the air we breathed. And in the middle of that loyalty, woven into our daily life, were the people we trusted most. My younger brother, Michael, always around, always helpful. My closest friend, Henry, who spent holidays at our table. My daughter's husband, who called me dad before he ever earned the right to. These were the people who circled our family like extended limbs of the same body. I loved them in different ways, but deeply. Enough to overlook flaws. Enough to excuse signs I shouldn't have ignored. My wife, though, she saw everything. She always said that people reveal themselves in quiet ways, habits, hesitations, the things they don't say. I used to tease her about reading too much into things. Now I understood she'd simply been paying attention while I drifted through trust with open hands. Her final weeks replay in my mind more often than I'd like. She was tired, but still herself, still listening, still thinking beyond the moment. She'd sit in her favorite armchair beside the window, watching the wind move through the trees. Sometimes she'd hold my hand and say things that felt mysterious then but painfully clear now. Not everyone who stands beside you stands with you. Some truths wait for their moment. Be careful who you defend. I always brushed those comments aside, assuming they were reflections of a woman preparing to leave the world. Soft wisdom meant to comfort me. I didn't realize she was preparing me for the blow she knew would come after she was gone. The betrayal she wrote about in that letter didn't just harm me, it hurt her too. She lived with the knowledge while pretending everything was fine, choosing silence not out of fear but out of love. She believed that exposing the truth while she was alive would break something in me I wasn't ready to rebuild. Now, standing in the empty spaces she once filled, I was finally ready not just to read her words, but to understand them. And understanding them meant revisiting a past I thought I already knew. For years, I believed I already knew who had wronged me. The betrayal my wife described in her letter wasn't new, only the name attached to it was. The incident itself had lived in my memory for decades, festering quietly like an old wound that never healed properly. It happened nearly 15 years ago. I was running my small construction business, nothing grand, but honest work that kept our family comfortable. One season, a major contract collapsed without warning. A client withdrew after receiving anonymous information that my company had mishandled funds. The accusation was false, but the damage was instant. We lost the job, our reputation took a hit, and I spent months patching the fallout. I thought I knew exactly who sabotaged me. Back then, my brother Michael and I weren't on good terms. We had argued about money, nothing dramatic, just simmering resentment that built over time. When the contract vanished and rumors spread, he seemed distant, evasive. A few people whispered that he'd made comments in town that didn't help my situation. I confronted him once, and his defensive tone made me even more certain. So I blamed him. Entirely. Silently at first, then openly. Our relationship fractured. We stopped talking for months that turned into years. Holidays were stiff, conversations reduced to nods, and whenever he offered help, I turned it down. In my mind, he had betrayed me out of jealousy, and I punished him with distance. My wife never agreed with my conclusion. She never defended him outright, but she didn't support the blame either. She would say things like, "Anger likes to find the easiest target. Not every wound comes from the person standing closest." I brushed her words aside. I told myself she was being gentle because that was her nature. I didn't think she knew anything I didn't. But when I opened her letter, the truth hit with a clarity that burned. She had known the real saboteur all along, and it wasn't Michael. She had carried the burden of that knowledge in silence, protecting me, protecting our family, preserving what little harmony we still had. And in blaming the wrong person, I had not only strained my relationship with my brother, I had unknowingly protected the true betrayer. Someone who still visited me. Someone I still trusted. Someone who watched the fallout unfold and let Michael take the blame without uttering a word. Sitting with that realization felt like watching my past collapse in slow motion. Everything I had believed about loyalty, everything I thought I understood, had been built on assumptions. And now, with my wife gone, I finally had to face the truth she refused to reveal while she was alive. A truth that would reshape everything that came next. The last weeks of my wife's life carry a heaviness I still feel in my chest. They were quiet days. Not in the peaceful way we once enjoyed, but in the way life quiets when it's preparing to let go of someone irreplaceable. I didn't realize it then, but she spent those weeks trying to guide me, to prepare me, to leave pieces of truth where I could one day find them. She spent most mornings in the armchair by the living room window. The light fell on her gently there, softening the lines of exhaustion on her face. Some days she'd ask me to sit with her, and I would. We didn't always talk. Sometimes she just held my hand, her thumb brushing mine like she was memorizing the shape of me. Other days, she spoke in ways that felt strange at the time, careful, intentional, as if she were choosing each word with more weight than usual. "People don't always reveal themselves when we want them to," she said once, staring out at the garden. "Sometimes, it takes years. Sometimes it takes a crisis." I didn't think much of it then. I just nodded, squeezing her hand gently. There were moments when she looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Not sadness. Not fear. Something closer to concern, like she worried not for herself, but for what would happen after she was gone. She'd brush my cheek and whisper, "You're stronger than you think, you know." I didn't feel strong. Watching someone you love fade day by day strips away any illusion of strength.
One evening stands out sharply in my memory.
She asked me to sit beside her, and when I did, she placed her wedding ring in my palm.
Her fingers lingered as if reluctant to let go.
"Promise me something," she said.
"Anything," I told her.
"When I'm gone, don't let loneliness blind you.
Don't cling to people who don't deserve your trust. And don't ignore the doubts you've buried. They matter."
Her voice trembled slightly. Mine did too when I answered, "You don't need to worry about me." But she shook her head softly.
"I do. Because you see the world the way you hope it is, not the way it is.
And I love you for that, but it also means you forgive too easily.
You excuse too much." She didn't mention the betrayal directly. She didn't name names. She never once hinted at the true culprit.
But looking back, I recognize those moments for what they really were, her attempts to prepare me for the truth she knew she wouldn't live to explain. There were other conversations. Small hints she dropped gently, as if afraid of breaking me too early.
"Be kind to your brother," she said one afternoon. "He carries burdens you don't see."
At the time, I thought she meant grief, or stress, or family pressure.
I didn't understand she was telling me he wasn't the one who betrayed me.
Another time, when Henry, my closest friend, stopped by with groceries, she watched him with an unreadable expression.
After he left, she asked quietly, "Do you trust him?"
"Of course," I said without hesitation.
She didn't respond. She just nodded, as if filing away something I didn't grasp.
As her strength faded, she spent more time writing.
Sometimes in her journal, sometimes on loose sheets of paper.
I assumed she was recording memories or leaving advice for our daughter.
I didn't pry.
She always sealed each page in the drawer beside her bed.
It wasn't until after the funeral, after the emptiness settled in like dust, that I found one envelope left unsealed inside the drawer. Not the final letter. A different one.
It contained a single sentence in her familiar handwriting. "Some truths can only be carried by the living."
At the time, it confused me.
Only when I opened her final letter did everything click into place, the warnings, the expressions, the gentle insistence that I look deeper. She had been leading me toward the truth long before she trusted me to face it. And now it was time to uncover exactly what she knew. When I finished reading her letter, I didn't move.
I didn't breathe. I didn't even blink.
It felt as if the room had folded in on itself, shrinking around the words she left behind. My wife had always been gentle, always careful with truth. So seeing her handwriting deliver something so sharp, so undeniable, it split something open inside me.
I read it again. Slowly. Each sentence carved deeper than the last.
She wrote that the betrayal didn't come from my brother, not from the man I punished with years of distance. She said it came from someone who benefited from my trust, someone who smiled at me while dismantling parts of my life behind my back.
Someone I still welcomed into my home. Someone I defended without question. At first, I refused to believe it. Grief plays tricks on the mind. I thought maybe my sorrow twisted her meaning, maybe I misunderstood. She was sick near the end. Maybe she wrote in confusion. Maybe I imagined the tone.
But the words were clear.
The details precise. The certainty unmistakable.
My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the collision of two truths, everything I had believed for 15 years, and what my wife had known all along.
A cold numbness settled over me.
It wasn't the kind that comes with panic. It was the kind that comes when you realize the ground beneath you had been unstable for years, and you've only now noticed the cracks. I looked around the bedroom, the neatly folded blankets she last touched, the framed photographs of vacations we thought would never end, the empty space on her nightstand where she used to keep her favorite book. In that moment, the house felt full of her presence but also full of secrets she had protected until now.
Why didn't she tell me earlier? The question echoed through my chest. But I knew the answer before I could finish asking it.
She kept it from me because she knew how deeply it would wound me, how it would alter my relationships, my trust, my sense of family. She waited until I no longer had her to lean on, but until I had just enough strength to stand on my own.
Even so, the shock came in waves.
The first wave was disbelief. The second was anger, not at her, but at myself, for never seeing what she saw. The third was grief, a new kind of grief, layered on top of the loss I was already drowning in. But beneath all of it, something calmer began to rise.
Not acceptance. Not clarity. Something like a quiet vow.
If her final act was to show me the truth, then my next act had to be confronting it.
And understanding who had betrayed me meant going deeper than I ever had before.
In the days that followed, I reread my wife's letter so many times the paper began to soften around the creases. Each time, the same name stared back at me, the person she said had quietly dismantled a piece of my life. A man I had trusted.
A man I let close.
A man who wore loyalty like a costume.
Henry. My closest friend.
The idea alone felt absurd. Henry had been in my life for almost as long as my wife had. He stood beside me at our wedding. He sat at our dinner table for holidays. He held my shoulder the day my father died. He was the one who brought groceries when my wife got sick. He was the one who told me, after the failed contract years ago, that sometimes people sabotage you just because they can.
I had mistaken that statement for empathy.
Now, I realized it might have been confession.
Still, I needed proof.
My wife's letter was enough to shatter my assumptions, but not enough to rebuild truth. So I began digging. At first, I didn't know where to start. Betrayal this old doesn't leave fresh fingerprints. But it does leave patterns, subtle ones.
If you know where to look.
And now that my wife had directed my gaze, I began seeing inconsistencies I once ignored. I started with old emails. I went through archived messages from the year of the contract collapse. Buried in my sent folder was a string of documents, financial breakdowns, bids, proposals, that I had forwarded to Henry for advice.
Advice he insisted he was happy to give. I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I?
What I didn't expect to find were forwarded versions of those same documents sent from Henry's email to someone else.
Someone connected to the company that eventually took the contract I lost.
The timestamps matched the week everything fell apart.
My stomach twisted.
Next, I opened boxes of paperwork my wife had neatly organized over the years. In one of them, I found a manila envelope labeled simply, 2008, contract dispute. Inside were notes, her handwriting, not mine. Tracking conversations she overheard, timelines she pieced together, small inconsistencies in Henry's stories.
She documented everything quietly.
She had known far earlier than I ever guessed.
One entry stood out. Henry visited the house the day before Michael confronted him.
He seemed nervous.
Asked several odd questions about the bid. Something is off. Another. Client's secretary hinted there was internal pressure to choose another company. Someone gave them a reason to doubt Peter.
Still no confirmation.
Keep watching. And then, a final note, written months later. Confirmed. Not Michael. That was all she wrote. No explanation. No elaboration.
But she had marked the date underneath, 2 years before she even became ill. She had lived with this truth in silence, watching me mistreat my brother in anger while the real culprit continued eating at our table. Piece by piece, the pattern solidified. Henry had positioned himself as my confidant to gain access to information he later used against me. He sabotaged the contract not out of malice alone, but because he wanted to benefit from the fallout.
The competitor company that undercut me?
He had indirect ties to them, small, but there.
Enough to profit. Enough to motivate betrayal.
I closed the envelope, my hands steady but cold.
My wife's final letter hadn't been a warning.
It had been a confirmation. A truth she had carried alone, waiting for me to be strong enough to face it. And now that I had the truth, there was no pretending anymore. The man I trusted most had quietly stolen years of my life. And I was finally ready to decide what to do with that knowledge.
Once the truth settled, once the shock melted into something colder, steadier, I realized I had reached a turning point. Not the explosive kind. Not anger, not outrage. Something quieter. A clarity that felt almost clinical. Henry had stolen more than a contract. He had stolen years of my trust, damaged my relationship with my brother, and allowed me to walk through life believing a lie that reshaped my family. And he did it without remorse, without ever revealing a crack in his performance as my closest friend. But confronting him in anger would accomplish nothing. Men like Henry feed off chaos. They twist, redirect, accuse, and pretend confusion until the truth becomes muddy. I wasn't going to give him that opportunity. I needed to protect myself, not emotionally, but practically. My wife's final days taught me that strength doesn't always come from fighting back. Sometimes it comes from quietly reclaiming what's yours. So that's what I decided to do. I gathered all the evidence, emails, notes, my wife's journal entries, and placed them in a secure folder. Then I made an appointment with my attorney, a woman named Margaret who had handled our wills and financial documents for years. She was sharp, discreet, and unfazed by emotional storms. When I sat across from her, I didn't tell her the entire story. I didn't need to. I simply explained that I wanted to restructure my assets. New beneficiaries. New protective clauses. New boundaries. No shared access or vulnerability that could be exploited. Margaret didn't question my motives. She could hear the resolve in my voice. She asked a few clarifying questions, took notes, and began drafting the documents. As I signed the first set of papers, a calmness washed over me, not relief, not triumph, just a steady sense of alignment. Like something inside me had clicked into place after being off-center for years. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about punishing Henry. It was about reclaiming control of my life, my legacy, and the truth my wife carried for so long. Whatever came next, I would face it on solid ground. In the weeks that followed my meeting with Margaret, I kept my distance from Henry, not in a dramatic way, but in a deliberate one. I didn't return his calls as quickly. I didn't invite him over as often. I didn't share the details of my life with the same ease I once did. I moved quietly, tightening the boundaries he never realized he'd crossed. And Henry noticed. Men like him always notice when their influence begins to slip. At first, he brushed it off with light humor whenever we spoke. "You're getting old on me, Peter, don't tell me you're turning into a recluse." But beneath his laugh, I heard something sharper. An edge. A warning. A week later, he stopped by unannounced, carrying a bag of groceries like he used to when my wife was ill. He placed them on the counter and scanned the room with quick, calculating eyes. "Haven't seen you much lately," he said. "Thought I'd check in." I nodded, keeping my tone neutral. "I've been busy taking care of things." He studied me for a moment too long. "Everything okay?" That was his way of probing, of assessing whether I suspected anything. He leaned against the counter casually, but his fingers tapped lightly, an old nervous habit I'd mistaken for impatience over the years. Now I recognized it as anxiety. "I'm fine," I told him. "Just sorting through paperwork." The way his expression flickered, barely, but enough, confirmed what I already knew. He was worried. Over the next few days, he made more attempts to reinsert himself into my routine. He suggested we get lunch, offered help with errands, even mentioned a business opportunity he thought I should consider, something he hadn't done in years. He was circling. Testing. Trying to gauge how much control he still had. When I didn't engage, his attempts grew more pointed. "One afternoon," he said, "you know, Peter, after your wife passed, I figured you'd lean on me more. But you seem distant." There it was, the first crack in his composure. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch just long enough to unsettle him. "I'm managing," I finally said. He forced a smile. "Good. You know I'm here for you. Like always." But I heard what he didn't say. "Like I expect you to be for me." His behavior only escalated after that. He started asking subtly invasive questions about my finances, about my daughter, about whether I'd updated my will since my wife's death. He couched them in concern, but the intent was unmistakable. The man who had once betrayed me was now fishing for whether I was still vulnerable, still blind, still in his reach. I gave him nothing. And the less I gave, the more unsettled he became. The turning point came one evening when he stopped by unexpectedly and found me shredding old documents in the study. His eyes darted to the machine, then to the stack of papers beside it. "What are you working on?" he asked too quickly, too sharply. "Just clearing out old files," I replied. He took a step closer. "Financial files?" I met his gaze. "Why does it matter?" He froze, caught off guard by my tone, a tone I had never used with him before. For the first time since discovering the truth, I saw fear flicker across his face. He masked it quickly, but not quickly enough. Something inside him knew the ground was shifting. Something inside him knew I had stopped looking at him through the lens of friendship. Something inside him knew I was preparing for the moment he feared most. The moment he would no longer have access to my trust, to my home, to my life. He just didn't know how close that moment already was. The day everything shifted from quiet preparation to decisive action began like any other. I woke early, made coffee, and stepped onto the porch where my wife used to sit with her morning tea. But instead of feeling grief alone, I felt direction. Purpose. A sense that the time had come to secure the life she wanted me to protect. At 10 sharp, I returned to Margaret's office to finalize the restructuring of my finances, assets, and estate documents. She greeted me with the same calm professionalism as always, but when she saw the folder of evidence under my arm, my wife's notes, the emails, the timeline she had pieced together, she nodded slowly. "You're ready," she said. I was. We started by going through each asset. My home. My savings. My retirement accounts. The business shares I still held. The land deeds. One by one, she guided me through the decisions that would place everything I'd built into a protected trust. A trust that could not be accessed, manipulated, or influenced by anyone without my explicit consent. Not now. Not ever. Then came the part that tightened something deep in my chest, choosing the beneficiaries. My daughter, who had always lived independently and never once taken advantage of me, remained. My brother Michael, whom I had unfairly blamed for years, was added. And a portion was designated for the small community shelter my wife used to volunteer at. A place she loved, where she believed kindness did the quietest work. There was one name missing. Henry's. He had been listed in earlier drafts of my will not for a large amount, but for a gesture of gratitude for decades of friendship. A friendship I now understood had been built on lies. When Margaret asked if I wanted him removed, I said, yes, with a steadiness that surprised even me. We continued working, refining clauses, adding protections, ensuring everything was airtight. Margaret didn't pry into the details of the betrayal, but she didn't need to. She could see the determination settling into me like stone. When all the documents were ready, she slid them across the table. "Once you sign these," she said, "no one will be able to contest or interfere. You'll have full control now and for the rest of your life." I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. As I signed page after page, I thought of my wife. How she protected me even in silence, how she waited for me to be strong enough to face what she already knew. I thought of the years I spent blaming my brother, the years Henry let me twist in resentment while he played the part of loyal companion. With every signature, I reclaimed something he had quietly stolen. My autonomy. My trust in my own judgment. My ability to choose who deserved a place in my future. When the final signature was done, Margaret gathered the pages and stamped them with her notary seal. The sound of that stamp landing was oddly final, like the closing of a door, the end of a long and painful chapter. She slid the completed binder toward me. "You've protected yourself well," she said. "Whatever happens next, you're standing on solid ground." I thanked her and left the office carrying not just paperwork, but clarity. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger. Not relief. Control. Real control.
When I stepped into the house, Henry's voice was waiting on my answering machine, cheerful and casual.
Hey, Peter. Just checking in again. Give me a call when you can. I listened to the message twice. Then I deleted it.
He still thought he had access. He still thought he could walk in and out of my life without consequence. He still thought nothing had changed.
But everything had.
And soon, he would learn exactly how much.
It didn't take long for the first cracks to show.
Henry had spent years benefiting from access to my life, my information, my trust, my resources. The moment those doors quietly closed, the ripple hit him harder than I anticipated. A few days after I finalized the trust, he called again.
Then twice more.
His tone shifted from casual friendliness to forced concern.
Hey, Peter, haven't heard from you. Everything all right? Just wanted to check in, call me back. Haven't seen you around. Let me know if you need anything. I didn't return a single call.
The following week, I learned from a mutual acquaintance that Henry was having financial trouble, serious trouble. His business opportunity, the one he'd tried to pitch to me earlier, had fallen apart.
Investors backed out.
A partner he'd depended on withdrew support. And somewhere in the shuffle, Henry realized the quiet resource he'd always relied on, me, was suddenly unavailable. He tried to reconnect more aggressively after that.
He stopped by my house twice. The first time, I simply didn't answer the door.
The second time, he lingered on the porch long enough for me to hear the tension in his breathing through the window.
Peter, I know you're home, he muttered. Come on. Don't be like this. But I stayed silent. That's when the desperation started to bleed through.
A week later, he attempted to withdraw funds from a joint emergency account we had opened years ago for a community project, funds I had already legally reallocated.
The bank flagged the attempt and notified me immediately.
Another day, he visited my brother, pretending concern for my well-being.
Has Peter been acting strange to you? He might need help.
Michael, unaware of the full story, simply told him I was taking time to myself.
But he also mentioned, later, when I asked, that Henry seemed anxious, unfocused, almost frantic.
The man who once walked through life with smug certainty now seemed unsteady on his feet. And still, he hadn't confronted me directly. He attempted one final tactic, guilt.
He left a long voicemail, voice trembling between frustration and self-pity.
Peter, listen, if something's wrong, you need to tell me.
I've always been there for you. You know that.
I don't understand why you're shutting me out.
After everything we've been through, you could at least talk to me.
But his words rang hollow.
Everything we'd been through? Yes. I remembered it clearly now.
Especially the parts he hoped I'd never uncover. As weeks passed, the consequences caught up even further. He lost a small contract. The competitor he'd relied on distanced themselves.
Rumors circulated that he was not as reliable as he appeared.
His influence, once quietly wielded, began slipping through his fingers. And beneath it all, he had no idea how much I knew. No idea that my wife's final letter had finally exposed him. No idea that the life he sabotaged was no longer powerless beneath his thumb. No idea that I was preparing for the moment he could no longer avoid. A face-to-face reckoning. One he had earned long before my wife ever put her truth to paper. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, one of those mild, quiet days when the air hardly moves and everything feels suspended. I was in the garden, trimming the hedges my wife used to fuss over, when I heard footsteps on the gravel path.
Heavy. Hesitant. Too familiar to mistake. Henry.
He stopped a few feet away, clearing his throat as if rehearsing the moment.
Peter, he said, we need to talk. I didn't look up right away.
I finished trimming the branch in front of me, brushed the leaves off my gloves, and only then met his eyes. He looked worn, shoulders tight, eyes darting, the false confidence stripped away. For the first time in years, he appeared unsure of his place around me.
"What do you want?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "I want to know why you've been avoiding me. Why you're acting like I've done something wrong." I let the silence settle between us. Long enough for him to feel it. "You really don't know?" I said finally.
His expression flickered. "If this is about the last few weeks, Peter, you're grieving."
I get it. But shutting people out isn't healthy. I've been trying to help.
Help?
I repeated. Is that what you call it?
He took a step closer, frustration leaking into his voice.
Yes, help. I've supported you for years.
I've been by your side through everything.
And now you treat me like a stranger. I removed my gloves and set them on the bench. A stranger would have treated me better than you did. He blinked. What's that supposed to mean?
I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope, my wife's letter.
I didn't hand it to him. I didn't need to.
The sight of it alone drained the color from his face.
She told me the truth, I said quietly. About the contract. About the lies. About how you used my trust to ruin me.
His mouth opened, but no words came out. Only a weak sound, caught somewhere between denial and fear.
I know what you did, I continued. I know who forwarded my documents. I know who fed information to the competitor. And I know you let my brother take the blame while you continued to eat at my table. Henry swallowed hard, eyes glistening. Peter, you're mistaken. You're grieving. She must have misunderstood. Don't insult her memory by pretending she didn't know exactly what she was talking about.
He took a desperate breath.
Please, we can talk about this. We can fix it. There's nothing to fix, I said. I just needed you to know I'm done.
His shoulders sagged. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, stripped of every illusion he built. You're cutting me out, he whispered.
No, I said. You cut yourself out the moment you betrayed the one person who trusted you the most.
He stared at me, waiting for a chance to argue, to negotiate, to claw back even a sliver of influence.
I gave him nothing.
Without another word, he turned, walked back down the path, and disappeared from my life. For good. After Henry walked away, the garden fell quiet again. So quiet I could hear the distant rustle of leaves, the soft hum of insects, the ordinary life around me that betrayal had once drowned out. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in air that somehow felt cleaner. Lighter. As if removing him from my life unclogged something I didn't realize had been blocked for decades. When I eventually returned inside, the house looked the same, but something in me wasn't. I felt a steadiness I hadn't known in years.
Not happiness. This wasn't a happy ending, but clarity. Peace born from truth.
Over the next week, I focused on repairing the relationships that truly mattered. My brother Michael came by for dinner one evening. It had been years since we shared a meal without tension. As we sat across from each other, the weight of past misunderstandings lingered like a shadow between us.
Mike, I said quietly, I owe you an apology.
He looked startled, then cautious.
For what? For blaming you, I replied. For something you didn't do. For letting resentment take root where trust should have been.
His eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen in a long time.
Pete. I never wanted to fight with you.
I tried to tell you back then, but you wouldn't listen.
I know, I said. And I'm sorry. He nodded slowly, and for the first time in over a decade, I saw the brother I grew up with, not the man I had built out of anger. We talked for hours after that.
About our childhood, about my wife, about the years we lost because I trusted the wrong person. When he left, he gave me a hug that felt like the closing of a wound. My daughter came by a few days later. She'd noticed the changes in my tone, the absence of Henry's presence, the steadiness in my voice. We took a walk through the garden, and she asked, Dad, are you okay? It was the first time in months someone asked me that without expecting something in return.
I'm getting there, I told her. Your mother left me something I needed to face. And I'm finally doing it. She didn't press.
Instead, she slipped her arm through mine, a small gesture, but meaningful. She had always been more like her mother than she realized.
With time, the house didn't feel as hollow. Not because the grief faded, it didn't, but because the truth had made space for something else, healing. My wife's letter had not been written to hurt me. It had been written to guide me, to steady me, to ensure I wouldn't spend the rest of my life anchored to a lie. Some evenings, I sit on the porch with her ring in my hand and talk to her the way lonely men speak to memories. I listened, I tell her. I finally listened. I think she would be proud, not that I cut someone out, but that I finally saw myself clearly. Saw my strength. Saw the people who truly deserved a place in my life. Henry's absence didn't take anything from me. It revealed how much he had already taken. And the truth my wife carried to her final breath became the truth that allowed me to reclaim the years ahead. If there's one thing my wife's final letter taught me, it's that betrayal rarely comes from the edges of our lives. It comes from the center, from the people we trust without hesitation, the ones we open our doors to, the ones we defend because we can't imagine they'd ever harm us. For years, I carried anger toward the wrong man. I let that anger shape my decisions, my relationships, my understanding of the past. Meanwhile, the real betrayer walked beside me freely, wearing loyalty like a disguise. And because I never questioned him, he never stopped taking advantage of the space I gave him. But here's what I've learned. Trust is a gift, not a guarantee. It must be earned, protected, and re-evaluated when actions no longer match words. My wife understood that long before I did. She saw what I refused to see. And even in her final days, she chose to give me the truth gently, not to shatter me, but to free me. She wanted me to stop carrying pain that wasn't mine to hold. She wanted me to rebuild the connections that were real and let go of the ones that were poison. And maybe that's the clearest lesson of all. Love doesn't blind you. Fear does. Fear of losing someone, fear of being alone, fear of facing a truth that changes everything. Once you let go of that fear, you begin to see people for who they truly are. Some will step closer. Some will fall away. And some will reveal themselves to have never been with you in the first place. Protect your heart. Protect your peace. And remember, the truth, no matter how painful, is the only foundation strong enough to build the rest of your life on. Thank you for listening to my story. Sharing something this personal isn't easy, but if it reached you, if it reminded you to trust your instincts, to protect your peace, or to look more closely at the people in your life, then it was worth telling. If you enjoy meaningful, emotional stories like this one, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these lessons find the people who need them most. Take care of yourself. Value the truth. And never forget, real loyalty doesn't need to be proven, it shows itself.